This is a fascinating story where history, faith, and archaeology all intersect.
Beneath one of Christianity's most sacred sites, something extraordinary has been uncovered. Something buried for nearly 2,000 years.
The new discoveries here at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre happened during a recent restoration around the tomb of Jesus.
What if a quiet restoration project in Jerusalem has revealed physical evidence that lines up exactly with the biblical account of Jesus' burial? And what if it changes everything we thought we knew about history, faith, and the story at the very heart of Christianity?
The faithful say Jesus' tomb was opened by God's command. Today, it opened again following a renovation that was hundreds of years in the making.
In the heart of Jerusalem, a city where history and faith intersect at nearly every corner, a recent restoration project has led to an unexpected and remarkable discovery. At the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, widely recognized as one of the most sacred Christian sites, archaeologists have uncovered what could be a crucial piece of the past, hidden for nearly 2,000 years beneath layers of stone, time, and tradition. This development came during a routine restoration effort in 2022, intended to preserve and stabilize parts of the ancient structure. The church itself stands on a location long believed to be the site of Jesus' crucifixion, burial, and resurrection, based on early Christian tradition and centuries of historical reference. It's a destination visited by millions of pilgrims every year, but few could have anticipated what lay beneath its stone floors. The restoration was led by a team from Sapienza University of Rome, under the direction of Professor Francesca Stasola, a respected figure in the field of archaeology. While the original focus was structural, the work soon turned into something far more significant when the team began unearthing soil and remains below the main sanctuary area. What they found was not more masonry or scattered artifacts, as might be expected in such a place, but the outline and evidence of an ancient cultivated garden, one that had been hidden from view and untouched for centuries. This was not simply a patch of old vegetation or a forgotten courtyard. The area showed clear signs of intentional design. Planting beds were arranged in an orderly fashion and bordered by stone walls. This suggested a planned and maintained space far more than a wild or incidental growth. Samples taken from the soil revealed preserved remnants of olive trees, grapevines, and other flora common in the region during the 1st century. These weren't just chance inclusions. The seeds, olive pits, and pollen were embedded in layers of undisturbed earth, protected beneath the floor of the church in such a way that they remained largely intact for study. This level of preservation allowed for detailed analysis, confirming the types of plants and their approximate age. Botanists and archaeologists involved in the project noted that the presence of olive and grape varieties was particularly significant. Both have been cultivated in the region for thousands of years and feature prominently in the cultural and spiritual practices of the time. Their inclusion in this specific location adds weight to the theory that the garden had more than a simple agricultural purpose. It could have served a ceremonial or spiritual role, especially given its proximity to what many believe is the tomb of Jesus. This discovery of an ancient garden beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre would be intriguing on its own, but what truly adds to its importance is what was found below the garden layer. Further excavation revealed a series of rock-cut tombs, carved directly into the stone bedrock beneath the garden. These tombs were not random or makeshift. They showed signs of careful construction and were likely used for burial during the same general period. The presence of these tombs led the team to ask deeper questions about the purpose and significance of the site. Was this garden and tomb complex used by a specific group of people? Was it reserved for those of a certain status or belief system? Could these tombs be linked to the early Christian community, or even to events described in the New Testament? While definitive answers are still being explored, the context is certainly compelling. The Gospel of John, for instance, mentions that Jesus was buried in a garden near the site of his crucifixion. The discovery of an actual garden with associated tombs in this precise area introduces a new dimension to that account. It suggests that the Gospel's description may not have been symbolic or poetic, as some scholars have argued, but instead a reference to an actual physical location, one that now appears to have been preserved beneath centuries of church history. Of course, it's important to approach such claims with caution. Archaeology is not about confirming beliefs, but about uncovering and interpreting physical evidence. Still, in this case, the alignment between what has been found and the biblical account is difficult to ignore. The layout of the garden, the species of plants, and the design of the tombs all reflect patterns known from first-century Jerusalem. The discovery is also helping researchers better understand how the area was used before the church was built in the 4th century under Emperor Constantine. Historical records indicate that the site was covered over during Roman times, possibly under Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century, who constructed a pagan temple over the Christian site. Ironically, that very act of suppression may have helped protect what lay beneath. By covering the garden and tombs with fill and new construction, the area was effectively sealed off, preserving it in a state untouched by later centuries. The team's findings have sparked renewed interest from both historians and theologians. Experts in ancient agriculture have been consulted to study the layout of the planting beds and the characteristics of the soil. Meanwhile, geologists and paleobotanists are analyzing the seeds and pollen to determine their exact origin and timeline. Everything is being carefully documented to ensure the findings can be peer-reviewed and placed within the wider context of Jerusalem's archaeological record. It's also worth noting that the discovery was made with great care and respect. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is not just a historical site, it's a place of worship and deep spiritual importance to many people around the world. All work was carried out in coordination with religious authorities to maintain the sanctity of the space, while ensuring the preservation of its buried history. This new chapter in the story of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre doesn't just add to the archaeological understanding of the site, it opens up questions that touch on faith, history, and cultural memory. For those who view the church as the literal site of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, the discovery of an ancient garden and burial space directly beneath its floor provides a powerful new layer of context. At the same time, the find stands as a reminder of how much of history is still hidden, even in places we think we fully understand. Beneath the footpaths of pilgrims and worshippers, beneath the marble and mosaic of one of Christianity's most venerated spaces, lay the quiet traces of ancient life. Seeds that had not seen sunlight for millennia, soil that had not been touched by human hands in centuries, and tombs carved by people who may have lived through the events that shaped a major part of human history. In the Gospel of John, chapter 19, verse 41, a short but significant line reads, "Now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid." For a long time, scholars have argued over the meaning of this verse. Some have taken it at face value, interpreting it as a literal reference to a real garden near the site of the crucifixion. Others have viewed it more symbolically, suggesting that the garden might have been a literary device, chosen to reflect spiritual themes such as renewal, peace, or the connection between life and death. This debate has carried on for centuries. In the absence of solid archaeological evidence, interpretations tended to rely on theological perspective rather than physical proof. Symbolic readings of biblical texts are common, especially in Christian traditions that emphasize allegory and spiritual metaphor. For some, the garden represented a new beginning, a setting for the resurrection and the dawning of a new era of faith. But for others, the insistence that the garden was metaphorical never quite settled the question, especially for those who believed in a more literal interpretation of the events surrounding Jesus' death and burial. Now, with the uncovering of an ancient garden beneath what is traditionally considered the location of Jesus' tomb, that discussion may need to be reconsidered. The archaeological evidence provides strong grounds to support the idea that the garden mentioned in the Gospel of John wasn't purely symbolic. It was real, physical, and present exactly where the Gospel describes. This is not just about plants and planting beds, it's about context. The olive trees and grapevines discovered match the kinds of plants that would have grown in first-century Judea. The pollen, seeds, and organic remains found in the soil all point to a cultivated, maintained space. Not a wild patch of earth, but a carefully structured garden, likely with some purpose or meaning beyond agriculture. From a biblical studies perspective, this is a meaningful development. If the Gospel of John is describing a real garden, and that garden has now been found in the exact location the text suggests, It lends credibility to the notion that the Gospel's author was referring to a genuine physical setting. It doesn't prove the entirety of the biblical narrative, of course. Archaeology rarely makes definitive claims of that kind. But it does provide a tangible link between the historical record and the scriptural text. This kind of physical confirmation is rare and can significantly affect how both scholars and the general public engage with biblical history. For those who have approached the Bible as a mixture of allegory, theology, and selective memory, the discovery introduces a new element of grounded reality. The fact that this garden exists, and that it is located in such a critical area for Christian tradition, makes it difficult to dismiss the biblical account as entirely symbolic in this case. It's also worth noting how the layout of the garden fits into what we know about burial customs of the period. In the 1st century, it was common practice to place tombs in gardens or orchards just outside city walls. This was partly practical. Burials were not allowed within the city for ritual and sanitary reasons, but it was also symbolic. Gardens were places of life and growth, and placing a tomb in such a setting offered a visual reminder of the cycle of life and death. The tombs discovered beneath the garden matched this cultural context. They were rock-cut, not simple graves or randomly placed resting places. They suggest a level of planning and care consistent with what one would expect from a site of spiritual or social significance. And the fact that they were found directly beneath the location traditionally associated with Jesus' tomb raises the possibility that this area was known and preserved because of its religious importance from the earliest years of Christianity. What makes this more than just coincidence is the way multiple strands of evidence now come together. The garden described in the Gospel of John is said to be located near the site of Jesus' crucifixion. That matches the geographical placement of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The garden was said to contain a new tomb, one that had not been used before. While it's impossible to identify a specific tomb as the one used for Jesus' burial, the presence of rock-cut tombs in close proximity fits the Gospel's description very closely. For those who approach the Bible from a historical rather than theological perspective, this convergence is significant. It suggests that the writer of the Gospel of John, or the oral tradition that preceded him, was referencing a real place that was known and remembered. That memory may have been preserved through the early Christian community and eventually recognized by Constantine's builders in the 4th century, when the first church was constructed on the site. Of course, not everyone will see the discovery in the same way. Some scholars will still argue that the presence of a garden and tombs, while interesting, does not prove the entire biblical narrative. And they are right to be cautious. Archaeological evidence should always be examined critically and in context. However, what this find does offer is a credible material connection to a very specific detail of the New Testament, one that had until now rested mostly on faith and tradition. The implications go beyond just confirming a verse in Scripture. They touch on the way history and faith are connected. For believers, the discovery of this garden may serve as a validation of long-held convictions. For historians, it opens up new lines of inquiry about how early Christians identified and preserved sacred spaces. And for archaeologists, it demonstrates the value of continued exploration, even in places as thoroughly studied as Jerusalem's Old City. It's also a reminder that sometimes historical truth and spiritual meaning are not as far apart as they seem. A garden described in a gospel, once thought to be metaphorical or symbolic, may now be understood as an actual physical location. And that, in turn, can reshape how people think about the wider narrative of Jesus' final days, how they unfolded, where they took place, and how they were remembered. This development does not aim to settle theological debates or dictate belief. Rather, it presents new information that can enrich our understanding of one of the most important sites in Christian history. Whether one approaches the Bible as a historical document, a sacred text, or both, the discovery beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre provides a compelling reason to revisit long-held assumptions and ask new questions. It shows that even in a place so central to Christian tradition, there is still more to uncover, literally and figuratively. The land beneath the church has not only held the physical remnants of the past, but has also carried a story forward through centuries of worship, conflict, and rediscovery. And now, as the soil yields its secrets, that story grows richer, more complex, and more grounded in reality than ever before. As the full details of the excavation beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre have come to light, researchers and historians have begun to outline just how closely the evidence lines up with what the Gospels describe. While archaeology is not about proving faith, it often uncovers patterns, structures, and physical clues that help either support or challenge long-standing traditions. In this case, the findings have done something rare. They appear to confirm several distinct points in the biblical account of Jesus' burial. When taken individually, each piece of evidence is interesting, but when looked at together, they form a compelling picture. Here are 6 key confirmations drawn from the discovery that directly connect with the gospel texts and help paint a clearer view of what may have happened in the days following the crucifixion. The first confirmation lies in the location itself. According to John 19:20, the crucifixion and burial of Jesus happened just outside the city walls of Jerusalem. This detail is consistent across the Gospels and was important at the time, both religiously and legally. Under Jewish law, executions and burials were typically carried out outside the city to preserve the ritual cleanliness of sacred areas. The garden and tombs uncovered beneath the church are situated outside the original boundaries of first-century Jerusalem, exactly where one would expect them to be based on this tradition. Studies of ancient city maps and archaeological records confirm that the area now occupied by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was just beyond the city walls during the Roman period. That alignment between the gospel narrative and the physical geography is hard to ignore. The second confirmation comes from the tombs themselves. The Gospels describe Jesus being buried in a tomb provided by a wealthy follower named Joseph of Arimathea. In Matthew 27:60, it says this was a new tomb that Joseph had cut out of rock. This wasn't a communal grave or a reused burial chamber. It was something that had been specifically prepared, most likely for someone of status. The tombs found beneath the garden, beneath the church match this description remarkably well. They were newly cut, carefully crafted, and reflect the kind of design used for elite burials during the time of Jesus. These were not simple resting places. Their size, shape, and layout suggest they were intended for individuals of high social standing, just the sort of tomb a person like Joseph of Arimathea might have offered. Third, the construction of the tombs offers another strong point of alignment with the gospel accounts. In Mark 15:46, it specifically mentioned that the tomb was cut out of rock. This is an important detail because it distinguishes this kind of tomb from natural caves or simple burial pits. Carving a tomb directly into stone required time, labor, and resources, again pointing to someone with wealth and means. The tombs uncovered in the excavation were not only rock-cut, but showed signs of craftsmanship and planning that are consistent with high-status burial practices of the period. This detail supports the notion that these tombs were not only real but carefully made, as described in the Gospels. The fourth confirmation is something more practical: the location of the garden itself and its immediate accessibility. The Gospel writers stress that Jesus was buried quickly, just before the start of the Sabbath. In Matthew 27:57-60 and Mark 15:42-47, the urgency of the burial is made clear. There wasn't time for a long procession or distant travel. The tomb had to be close, ready, and available. The discovery of a garden with tombs just outside the city walls matches this scenario perfectly. Its proximity to the supposed site of the crucifixion and its accessibility would have made it an ideal choice for a hasty but respectful burial. This context adds a layer of realism to the narrative. It shows how the physical landscape and the timing of religious laws could have shaped the actions described in the Gospels. Fifth, the type of plants found in the garden has drawn special attention. Olive trees and grapevines were among the species uncovered, and these are not just random plants. They hold deep spiritual and symbolic meaning in Jewish and Christian traditions. The olive tree, for example, is a powerful symbol of peace, renewal, and anointing. Grapevines represent fruitfulness, sustenance, and covenant. These plants also happen to be native to the region and were commonly grown during the 1st century. Their presence in the garden provides not only historical authenticity, but also a layer of spiritual connection that links the site to the themes found in the New Testament. The garden described in John 19:41 becomes far more than just a plot of earth. it becomes a place that holds both life and death, memory and hope. The sixth and perhaps most unexpected confirmation comes from an event that happened almost 2 centuries after the crucifixion. Around 135 AD, Roman Emperor Hadrian ordered the construction of a pagan temple over the site. Historical sources suggest that this was a deliberate move to erase Christian memory and religious presence in the area. Ironically, this attempt to wipe away the early Christian history may have been the very thing that preserved it. When Hadrian built his temple, he covered the garden and tombs in layers of fill and stone. This protected the area from later damage and disturbance. What Hadrian saw as an act of suppression ended up serving as a kind of time capsule, sealing off the garden and tombs for nearly 2,000 years. The fact that early Christians were honoring this place even before Hadrian's intervention adds weight to the idea that they knew its significance, further reinforcing the belief that this was indeed the original location described in the Gospels. Each of these 6 confirmations, location outside the city, tombs fit for a wealthy individual, rock-cut construction, urgent burial site, symbolic plant life, and preservation through Roman interference, contributes to a growing body of evidence. Taken together, they create a strong case that the garden and tombs discovered beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre align very closely with the events described in the New Testament. This doesn't mean that all questions are answered. There's still much to study, document, and understand. Archaeologists are careful to avoid making sweeping claims, but what they've uncovered so far has opened the door to a deeper, more tangible understanding of how the biblical record fits into the historical and physical world. In an era where faith and evidence are often seen as being in opposition, this discovery offers a rare moment of overlap, a place where ancient texts and modern science seem to point to the same truth. For years, critics of the Bible have argued that many of its stories are either symbolic or legendary in nature, meaningful perhaps, but not historically grounded. The Gospels, especially the parts that deal with the final days of Jesus' life, have often been approached as theological narratives rather than historical records. Some have claimed that the resurrection story was shaped primarily by faith communities in the years that followed, with less emphasis on whether the events actually happened as described. But this recent discovery invites a more balanced reconsideration. It doesn't prove or disprove spiritual claims, and it doesn't settle religious debates. What it does, however, is place the story back in the physical world. It shows that the places mentioned in the gospel accounts weren't just literary devices or imaginative settings, they were real locations. The garden, the tombs, and the proximity to ancient Jerusalem's city walls all match the text far more closely than previously confirmed by archaeology. For historians and researchers, this find is valuable because it confirms that oral traditions and early Christian memory may have preserved accurate information about geography and burial practices. For decades, some scholars had assumed that Christian communities may have embellished or altered the story of Jesus' burial to align with theological themes. The idea that there was a real garden next to a real tomb, in a real location just outside the city, had been viewed with suspicion or considered symbolic. Now that view is being challenged by direct physical evidence. This discovery has also added weight to the idea that the early Christian community treated this location as significant from the beginning. The fact that Emperor Hadrian felt the need to build a pagan temple over the site in 135 AD supports the theory that early believers were already gathering there and commemorating it. If the memory of the place had not been important, it's unlikely the Roman authorities would have gone to such lengths to bury it, literally and figuratively. Ironically, their attempt to erase the early Christian presence may have ensured the site's preservation, protecting it from future construction and damage. There's also the broader question of how discoveries like this affect public perception of the Bible. For many people, especially those who may be skeptical of religion, the Bible has often been viewed as a book of moral teachings or spiritual wisdom, not as a historical document. Some assume that its details are too ancient or too wrapped in theology to be verified or trusted. But when something mentioned in the text is found, with physical evidence supporting it, those assumptions come under pressure. It suggests that at least some parts of the Bible are not only based on faith, but also on events and places that existed in the real world. This doesn't mean that every part of the Bible can or should be treated as a straightforward historical account. Religious texts are complex, written over many years, and reflect different genres and purposes. However, when archaeology uncovers something that aligns with a specific and testable claim, like the location of a garden and tomb just outside Jerusalem, it invites a deeper level of engagement. It encourages scholars, believers, and skeptics alike to ask new questions and to re-examine what they thought they knew. One of the most striking aspects of this discovery is how ordinary it seems, despite its deep historical significance. Seeds, stones, and soil are not flashy. They don't look miraculous or dramatic. And yet, in their quiet way, they speak volumes. The seeds preserved in the earth, the layout of the planting beds, and the structure of the tombs all tell a story that had been lost to time. It's a story that now echoes the words written in ancient texts, bridging the gap between the world we live in today and the one described 2,000 years ago. For people of faith, this discovery may come as a moment of affirmation. It's rare that something mentioned in the Bible is uncovered so clearly and so close to where tradition has long placed it. But even for those who do not share that belief, the find is still deeply valuable. It enriches our understanding of Jerusalem's history, adds depth to the record of Roman-era burial practices, and provides insight into how religious memory is preserved, even when attempts are made to erase it. It also brings to light the role of archaeology not just as a science of the past, but as a tool for cultural dialogue. These findings do not force belief, nor do they dismiss it. Instead, they present facts, measurable, observable facts that sit alongside traditions and interpretations. They create a shared space where historians, theologians, and everyday people can consider what it means to connect the stories of ancient texts with the land beneath our feet. In many ways, the discovery beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre reminds us that history is never fully written. Even in places that have been studied, visited, and revered for generations, there are still layers of the past waiting to be found. What lies hidden can still surprise us, challenge us, and reshape how we think about the world and its stories. The garden and tombs may not answer every question, but they do confirm that the Gospels were rooted in a real place. They add weight to the idea that the people who wrote those accounts were describing something they believed had truly happened, in a setting they knew. And while belief itself remains a personal and spiritual matter, the physical context in which that belief was formed is now a little clearer. In today's world, where ancient texts are often criticized, dissected, or dismissed, this discovery stands out. It's not the result of speculation or ideology. It's the result of slow, careful digging, of analyzing soil samples, of studying pollen grains under microscopes. It's science, but it happens to intersect with one of the most significant spiritual stories in human history. For some, that intersection will be profound. For others, it may be simply an interesting coincidence. Either way, it adds a layer of richness to our understanding of the past. It shows that history and tradition are not always separate, that sometimes they speak to each other across time, and that sometimes they speak with surprising clarity. As more research continues and as findings are published and debated, it's likely that this discovery will remain a topic of discussion for years to come. But one thing is already clear. What was once thought to be only a story passed down through faith has now left a mark in the earth. And for anyone interested in the truth, historical, spiritual, or both, that's a story worth listening to.